I came to Trenton, I served a church in Springfield that had a youth minister on staff. Each year, he did most unusual things with the older teenagers. He would invite several businessmen and women to come and speak with the youth. And here's the subject that these professional leaders would speak to them. Tell us 2 or 3 of your greatest failures, your biggest mistakes, and what became of them. Mind you, not the successes, but the failures and the mistakes. It didn't take many years for that sanctuary to absolutely be packed on that afternoon when these professional people would come and speak to the teenagers. The adults got in on the act too. They wanted to hear what these people had to say. To be sure, there's a lot to be learned from people who are highly, highly, highly successful. But maybe we tend to forget what all can be learned from another person's failures and mistakes and disasters. What do these people have in common? Jacob, Peter, David, Noah, Jonah, Gideon, Miriam, Martha, Thomas, Zacchaeus, Elijah, Moses, Abraham, Lazarus. Well, easily we could say they're all heroes of the Bible, aren't they? But that doesn't mean they always were. Jacob was a cheater, we know that. Peter denied knowing the Lord. David committed adultery. He did worse things even than that. Noah was prone to drink too much. Jonah ran away from God. Remember that? Gideon was insecure. Miriam was a gossiper. Martha was a worrier. Thomas was a doubter. Zacchaeus was a cheater. Elijah was depressed. Moses stuttered. Abraham was way too old. And Lazarus was way too dead. Yes, they're heroes of the Bible. Each one of them. God took them, though, at moments when they were broken and guided them into something special. Again and again, we see this very thing play itself out in Scripture. One of the greatest examples of this would be the man we first became aware of by the name of Saul, who became Paul. Saul, who had that blinding light experience of the risen Lord on his way to Damascus. He was a super Pharisee. He persecuted and was involved with making the decision to kill numerous Christians, young Christians at that time. He had blood on his hands. But Saul became Paul. Here's the formula. Brokenness plus God equals a fresh start. So Moses died right at the border of the Promised Land. He saw the land, but he died and never got to enter it. Leadership of these past 40-year wandering Jews was passed to Joshua. History reveals that Joshua was able to accomplish an equal amount of great things for the people of Israel that Moses did. It's just that Moses gets all of the headlines. It's Joshua's first assignment, though, that has failure wrapped all around it. In the middle of the seasonal flooding period of the River Jordan, Joshua had been asked by God to cross that river and lead the Israelites into the Promised Land. But it was the worst time of year to do that. The Jordan can be a very non-threatening, easy-going river. But it annually becomes a very dangerous type of river to cross when it is flooding. Such a request from God to Joshua, and then from Joshua to all of the people, it must have appeared to the observer observer to be absolutely ridiculous. Just wait a few weeks until the river level goes down. After all, the people have been wandering around for 40 years. What's the rush to cross the river? All we can say to that is that God's timing is not always going to be our timing. The river, according to God, must be crossed now. Well, it doesn't take long to know why. Joshua did as God had instructed him. He instructed the priests to carry the Ark of the Covenant, which had the tablets of the Ten Commandments inside of it, to the river's edge. Shouldn't the Ark and the tablets be the last thing you would want to risk when the Jordan River is flooding? Wouldn't that be the very last thing? It was the first thing. God wanted it that way. This could have been a total disaster. I don't know if we fully appreciate that, what Joshua was up against here. Lives could have been lost. Joshua's leadership for the future could have ended, could have taken a huge nosedive. Even the ark and the tablets could have been lost forever. On paper, this reads like a story with an unnecessary risk. This was a gigantic mess just waiting to happen. We know that years earlier, God had parted the Red Sea so that the Israelites could run in between the waters, and then the waters would enclose on Pharaoh and his army. Timing was crucial back then. There's nothing crucial about the time now, though. If they waited for the waters to recede, that would make common sense, practical sense. I believe that God's timing sometimes can be a reminder of our true weakness and His greatness. No doubt the people were excited about entering the Promised Land. I get that. It had been a long trip. 40 years worth of a long trip. Whenever you take a trip with your family, you know, before you get to that destination, and they've said, "Are we there yet?" about 50 times. We've all been there. About 25 miles before you get to that destination are the longest miles of all. The first time that Peggy and I and Wilson and Ryan went to the Tetons, about 25 miles south of Jackson Hole, the State Highway Department was doing repair work on the highway. It took 45 minutes just to sit there. Well, I know what I wanted to tell you. This came to me. Last week I had to make a trip to South Kansas City. Do you know what's the big theme park? Worlds of Fun. You know where that's at on 435. Now go south all the way to Bannister Road, where the big shopping center used to be. There was backed up traffic not moving for that distance. I kid you not. I don't know if those people have gotten home yet. And don't you just hate sitting there not knowing, are you supposed to get in the right lane or the left lane or jump out of the car and go swimming in the Missouri River? You don't know. You don't know how long this is going to take. But the last few miles of a long trip can seem like they take forever. Forever. And I have no doubt that these people, these Israelites, were eager to get into the Promised Land. It's just across the river. They were eager. But I also have no doubt that they must have thought to themselves, Joshua has lost his mind. This is not going to work. This is a raging river when it floods. If we've been walking around for 40 years, we can sit down for another 2 months. I'm sure that was in their thinking. Eugene Peterson translates Matthew 5, verse 30 this way. You're blessed if you're at the end of your rope with less of you, there is now more of God. Can you argue with that? I can't argue with that. We know that would be right. You know, I wonder what the community out there thinks of those of us in here. Here's what I hope they would see in us. I hope that they would see that you and I are a broken people. Broken. But a people who have come face to face with that brokenness. Brokenness is an idea that the world doesn't know what to do with. Brokenness says that at the core, we are fractured. Brokenness says that we've tried, but we can't seem to fix our own selves. Brokenness says that no self-help program, no amount of counseling, as good as it can be, no new best-selling book can rescue us from what plagues us. The world, which likes to think of a self as powerful and a beautiful thing, can't quite accept that there's a rock bottom in life that even self can't rescue self from. I don't know where I first encountered this expression, but we've all heard it. Coming to the end of ourselves. But that is precisely what brokenness is all about. That phrase suggests that there is a place deep down, a rock bottom, at which there is, at that point, no more self. I believe that God's timing can sometimes be a reminder of our weakness and His greatness when we are at that proverbial end of the rope. When we hit that kind of bottom, God is our rock. He's our rock. He's there. He's been there. There may not be much left of you and me, but that's where He is to help build us back up. If we read the Joshua story carefully, we find that God told Joshua on 3 separate occasions, be strong, be courageous. Why do you think 3 times? Was Joshua hard of hearing? I don't think so. It was because Joshua and the people were feeling weak and afraid. That should encourage you and me. In our lives, there are numerous times when we feel weak and afraid. The great news is that God uses our weakness and our fear to get our attention, to turn us toward His strength and courage. And that's what happened to Joshua at the river. God told Joshua not to focus on what he couldn't do, but on what God can and will do. Joshua must have had a change in his thinking. In the early 1950s, doctors and scientists were of the opinion that no human being could run the mile under 4 minutes. Just in case you're dying to know, I've never accomplished that either. That'd be one for the books, John. It was, so they said back then, impossible. They argued that the bone structure of human anatomy was wrong for it, that the human lung capacity was inadequate for it, that the human heart was unable to endure a 4-minute mile. But 25-year-old Roger Bannister wasn't listening. He was busy training. On May 6, 1954, he ran the mile, and catch this time, with a time of 3 minutes, 59 seconds, and 4/10. He just made it. He accomplished something that everyone said, this is impossible, it will never happen. Now the interesting thing is this. Just 47 days later, another runner ran the mile under 4 minutes. And by 1957, just 3 years later, 16 runners had broken the 4-minute mile. Runners didn't just suddenly become stronger athletes in such a short period of time. So what happened? One shift. Why no one, and then 1, and then 2, and then 16 more? They became mentally stronger. Bannister's accomplishment and the knowledge that a 4-minute mile was attainable changed the way these athletes thought. The same is true in our lives. In our lives. There are times when our greatest barriers, more often than not, come from what I would call a small way of thinking. Or let me say that another way. Sometimes our barriers come from a faith that is not fully activated. I encourage us to move from our messes in life towards the message that Jesus Christ is here to help us. Not just to save us. Let's put that one at the top of the list. That's the cross. That's the resurrection. But also to help us day after day after day after day. My feet are on the ground. I live in the same world as you do, the real world. And I am acutely aware of the severity of our hardships. But this much I have learned. It is not the size of your ability to overcome hardships. It is the size of Christ inside of us. It is the size of Christ that we have invited in. Through His Spirit, we can do far more than we sometimes keep or think. And keep this in mind. There will be times when God calls us to take a step of faith in spite of our weakness, in spite of our brokenness, before God opens up a path ahead. That's what happened here in this story. He told Joshua to tell the priest, carry the ark to the edge of the water and stand there. Nothing happened until they did that. And when they did, the river dammed up somehow. But they had to go and get into the river. Did you ever see the great movie Apollo 13? You know, some movies have a way of just staying with you. The reason I like that movie is because it illustrates so many important things in life. One scene is of particular importance. The Apollo 13 spacecraft has just gone through an explosion and rendered it helpless. As it floats through space, Mission Control, back in Houston, tries everything to figure out what can be done to bring these astronauts safely back to Earth alive. Remember this man? I bet you do. Gene Kranz. He's the lead flight director. He's mobilizing every human being on the face of this earth to conjure up solutions for saving this crew. And in the midst of this great despair, the NASA director says this: this could be the worst disaster that NASA has ever experienced. To which Gene Kranz replies, with all due respect, sir, I believe this will be our finest hour. Our mess, with all of our weaknesses, I got them, you got them, placed in the hands of God, can become our finest hour. Jesus had a way of turning things upside down. You would expect God to use your strengths and your successes, the times when you overcame, you endured, when you compromised. And of course, God can use those parts of our lives. More often, though, He makes use of your weaknesses, your brokenness, your incompleteness to accomplish His purposes. As God once said to the Apostle Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness." Let's say that together. My grace is sufficient for you.